If you've ever stared at a growing pile of things you own and still felt poor inside, this story is for you. Not poor in the way a bank statement measures. Poor in a quieter place, the place that keeps buying and never feels finished buying. There is a mountain monastery where the monks own almost nothing, and outsiders who visit always ask the same question. How can they be so calm with so little? Today I want to tell you about one monk in particular, and a young merchant who traveled 3 days to ask him something most of us are too afraid to ask ourselves. The monk's answer took only 7 words. 7 words that undid everything the merchant believed about money. We will get to those words. But first, you need to understand what brought that merchant up the mountain in the first place. Before we go further, tell me in the comments. If someone took away everything you own except what fits in one small room, what would you actually miss? Not what you think you should say. What you would really miss. You might be surprised how short that list turns out to be. The merchant's name was Devarim, and in the valley below the mountain, everyone knew his name. He owned 3 warehouses of silk and spice, a house with 7 rooms and more gold coins than his own accountant could count without losing track twice. Devarim had built this from nothing. His father had sold vegetables from a cart, and Devarim had grown that cart into a small empire, coin by coin, deal by deal, year by year, until the valley spoke his name the way people speak of weather, as something that simply is, immovable and enormous. But there was a fact about Devarim that his customers never saw. Every night, after the shop windows were shuttered and the last coin was counted and locked away, he could not sleep. He would lie in his wide bed, in his large house, surrounded by more comfort than 10 families needed, and he would do arithmetic in the dark. How much this month? How much less than last month? How much a rival merchant across the valley might be earning instead? The numbers moved through his mind like insects he could not kill and could not ignore. He owned 7 rooms and slept comfortably in none of them. It was his wife who finally said the thing he already knew but refused to hear. She told him that a man who has enough and still trembles does not have a money problem. He has a peace problem. And she had heard from a trader passing through of an old monk on the mountain 3 days north, a man who had once been wealthier than Devarim and had walked away from all of it, and who now owned, by most accounts, 1 robe, 1 bowl, and nothing else. Devarim laughed at first. What could a man with nothing teach a man with everything? But that night, the arithmetic in his head grew louder than usual, and by morning he had packed a bag and begun the climb. The road up the mountain was steep, and the merchant was not used to walking. 3 days he climbed, and with every mile the noise of the valley grew fainter, and something else, something he did not have a name for yet, grew louder in its place. On the evening of the 3rd day, he reached a small stone dwelling at the edge of a cliff, where an old monk sat outside with an empty wooden bowl beside him, watching the sun lower itself into the clouds like it had nowhere urgent to be. Devarim introduced himself, expecting the name to mean something even here. It did not. The monk simply asked why a stranger had climbed 3 days to see an old man with nothing to offer him. And Devarim, exhausted and stripped of his usual confidence by the thin mountain air, told the truth for what may have been the first time in years. He said he had built an empire and still lay awake afraid. He said he did not understand how a man who had given everything away could look more at peace than a man who had accumulated everything there was to accumulate. The monk listened without interrupting, which unsettled Devarim more than any question could have. When the merchant finished, the monk only nodded slowly and invited him to stay the night. But what Devarim didn't know was that this monk had once owned more than 3 warehouses himself. He had once been a landholder with fields stretching farther than the eye could measure, and a household of 40 servants, and a name that opened doors before he even knocked. Nobody in the valley remembered this anymore, because it had been so long ago, and because the monk had made sure of it. That first night, Devarim could not sleep, even on the thin mat the monastery offered him, even in the silence of the mountain air. He lay listening to the wind, and for the first time in years, he did not hear numbers. He heard nothing at all, and the nothing frightened him more than the numbers ever had. In the morning, he asked the monk directly how a man walks away from everything he built. And this is where everything changed, because the monk did not answer with a story of enlightenment or sudden wisdom. He answered with a memory of fear. The monk told him that he had once been afraid in exactly the way Devarim was afraid. He remembered the night his largest harvest failed, and how he had stood in his own fields watching the crop rot in unexpected rain, and how in that single night he understood something he had spent his whole life avoiding. Everything he owned could be taken by weather he did not control, by markets he did not control, by time itself, which no man controls. He had built his entire sense of safety on things that could vanish between one sunset and the next. Remember this detail. It matters later. For a full year after that failed harvest, the man who would become the monk tried harder. He diversified his holdings. He hired guards for his warehouses. He made alliances with other wealthy families so that if one fortune fell, another might catch him. But the fear did not shrink. It grew, because now he understood there was always something more to protect, always a new way to lose what he had. The more he owned, the more directions the fear could come from. He described it to Devarim as trying to hold water in two open hands. The tighter he closed his fingers, hoping to keep more, the faster it ran through the gaps. And this is where the merchant leaned forward, because he recognized the water. He had felt it running through his own hands for 15 years. The monk continued. He said that one morning, without planning it, without any dramatic vision or voice from the heavens, he simply stopped. He was standing in a warehouse counting bolts of cloth, and he set down the ledger mid-count, and he understood that no number he wrote in that ledger would ever be large enough to make the fear stop. There was no finish line. There was only ever the next number and the next fear that came with it. He walked out of that warehouse and did not go back. He gave his land to his workers, his gold to his creditors, and to the temples in his district, and he kept only what fit in a single bag. People in his old life called it madness. But what he didn't know yet, standing outside his own warehouse for the last time, was that he was about to feel something he had not felt since childhood, and had forgotten was even possible to feel. Devarim asked what that was, and the monk grew quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that makes a listener sit very still. He said it was rest, not sleep. He had slept plenty of nights as a wealthy man, exhausted into unconsciousness by worry. This was different. This was the rest of a mind that had stopped doing arithmetic it could never finish. For the first time since he was a boy, he woke up and the first thought in his head was not a number. It was simply the morning. Devarim sat with that for a long time before he finally asked the question he had climbed 3 days to ask. He asked the monk, plainly, how much is enough? And the old monk looked at him with something close to tenderness, because he recognized this question. It was the same question he had once asked, in a different valley, to a different old man, many years before. He told Devarim that most people spend their whole lives trying to answer that question with a bigger number, and the number never holds, because the fear was never really about the number to begin with. Then he gave Devarim his answer. 7 words, spoken slowly, in the low, even voice of a man who was no longer performing wisdom for anyone, because he had nothing left to sell and no one left to impress. He said, I own nothing, so I lack nothing. Devarim turned the words over the way you turn over a coin you don't recognize, checking it from every side. At first, they sounded like a riddle, or worse, like the kind of thing wealthy tourists say when they visit poor villages and mistake simplicity for happiness. But the monk explained what he meant, and slowly it stopped sounding like a riddle and started sounding like the plainest truth Devarim had ever heard. The monk was not saying that poverty is holiness, or that money is evil, or that Devarim should burn his warehouses down. He was saying something more precise. Fear does not come from what you have. Fear comes from what you believe you cannot survive losing. A man with 1 robe and 1 bowl has already made peace with losing the robe and the bowl, because he never let his sense of being safe depend on them. A man with 7 rooms and 3 warehouses has quietly, without ever deciding to, let his safety depend on every single one of those rooms staying full and every warehouse staying stocked. He has built a fortress with 1,000 walls, and now he lies awake each night checking every wall for cracks, because somewhere in his mind he has confused the fortress with himself. That merchant is you, every time you refresh your banking app, hoping the number will finally make you feel safe, and it never quite does. And you tell yourself it will feel different once the number is bigger. It will not. The relief you are chasing was never in the number. It was in the letting go of needing the number to be a certain size before you're allowed to rest. This is not a lesson about giving away your possessions on a mountain. Very few of us are called to that, And the monk himself told Devarim this directly, because he had watched other wealthy visitors misunderstand him and go home to make foolish, dramatic gestures that helped no one. The lesson is quieter, and it fits inside an ordinary life. It is the difference between accumulation and sufficiency. Accumulation asks, how much more do I need to finally feel safe? Sufficiency asks, what do I already have that is enough, right now, tonight, exactly as it stands? Accumulation has no finish line because there is always a bigger warehouse somewhere. Sufficiency has a finish line you can reach today because it was never about the size of the pile. It was about your relationship to the pile. So here is what I want you to do starting tonight, in 3 small steps, none of which require you to give anything away. First, tonight before you sleep, write down 3 things in your life that money did not buy and cannot buy back if lost. A person, a memory, the quality of a particular morning light through your window. Keep the list somewhere you will see it again. This is not a gratitude exercise for its own sake. It is a reminder of where your actual safety has been living the whole time, quietly, underneath the arithmetic. Second, choose one financial fear you carry, the one that visits you most often at night, and write down the actual worst version of it happening, not the vague dread, the specific scenario. Most people discover that even the worst version is survivable, and something can be planned for or lived through, and it is the vagueness of the fear, not its size, that has been keeping them awake. Third, pick one thing you own that you have been holding on to out of fear rather than use or joy, and let it go this week, sold, given, or simply released. Not because owning things is wrong, but because the practice of releasing one thing on purpose teaches your mind in a small and manageable way that you can survive letting go. It is training, the same way lifting a light weight trains you for a heavier one later. Devarim stayed on the mountain 3 more days before he returned to the valley. He did not give away his warehouses. He did not become a monk. But something in him had shifted in a way his wife noticed before he even said a word, in the way he sat at dinner, in the way his shoulders sat lower on his back. Word passed through the valley, as it always does, that the great merchant had visited a poor monk on the mountain and come back somehow richer, though nobody could quite explain what he was richer in. Picture the monk now, as the sun finishes its descent behind the mountain ridge, his bowl empty beside him, not because he has nothing, but because he has stopped needing it full to feel at peace. Picture him closing his eyes without a single number crossing his mind. He told Devarim before the merchant left that the bowl was never really about the bowl. It was about learning to sit beside an empty one without flinching. That, he said, is the only kind of wealth that never runs out, because it was never counted in the first place. And so I ask you what that monk asked every visitor who climbed his mountain looking for an answer written in gold. Not how much do you have, but how much of what you have is actually holding you hostage. The number in your account will keep changing for the rest of your life, rising some years, falling in others, and no amount you reach will ever, on its own, hand you the rest you are looking for. That rest was always available to you tonight, in this room, exactly as your life stands right now. If this story gave you even a single moment of that rest, there are more stories waiting for you here, drawn from mountains and marketplaces and quiet monasteries where people have been asking these same questions for longer than any currency has existed. Next time, I will tell you about a king who traded his crown for a single afternoon of peace, and what he discovered he had to give up to get it. Walk gently, hold loosely,